Okay, great. So thanks everyone for coming to our session, making it all the way over here and finding the room. So our session is called What are the True Costs of Open Access Book Publishing? And because we only have 40 minutes, I'm going to dive right in, even though I know some people may still be coming in. I'm Ann Houston. I'm the Director of Libraries at Swarthmore College, and I'm moderating our session with representatives of 3 presses that are active in the open access book publishing space. And just as a bit of preamble, I put this session together with Charles Watkinson from Michigan Publishing, who can't be here because he's speaking about another session on open access book publishing at the same time. But Charles and I worked on this together, and it came out of discussions about the Lever Press, which is a press that both Charles and I are involved in, and Lev, who's speaking today, is involved in. And a sense that librarians might like to know more about what open access book publishing models cost publishers, and what are the budget considerations that go into determining an open access model? Because sometimes as librarians, we just hear, well, here's what it will cost you to participate in this model, but what is really underlying that model? What does it really cost to publish a book and to publish an open access online book? And an agreement that, some more knowledge sharing on this topic might be good for all of us as we work together to think about a sustainable future for open access book publishing, and how we can work together, librarians and publishers, to have a sustainable future. That's the more transparency we have about budget models, the better off we're all going to be. So we may not completely answer our question, what are the true costs, but we can make a start. So our panelists today are Roz Pine, the Global Director of Research and Open Access at Bloomsbury Publishing. Tara Cyphers, Assistant Director of the Ohio State University Press, and Lev Rickards, Assistant Dean for Collections and Scholarly Communication at Santa Clara University, representing the Lever Press, which is a librarian-led open access press, if you're not familiar with it. Our plan for the session today, we're going to start off with each speaker talking for just a few minutes to introduce themselves, describe their work with open access publishing, and describe the model used by their press to fund open access books. Then we're going to have a couple of questions, just a very few questions for the panel to discuss. And then we're hoping to have some time at the end for audience Q&A. We'll try to leave like maybe 10 minutes for that. So why don't we just go ahead and dive right in. And Roz, would you like to start?
Sure. So hi, everyone. So about Bloomsbury to start with, we're an independent publisher. Our academic division focuses on the arts, humanities, and social sciences. And we publish books of various stripes, so monographs, textbooks, reference, as well as digital resources. From an open access perspective, we're what we might think of as a mixed model publisher in that we're making some of our research publishing open access, but not all of it. For context, we publish about 1,000 monograph or research-based titles a year, and this year we'll make 100 of our frontlist titles OA, so about 10% is going OA. We've offered open access since 2008, so this is an open access for books. So we've really been in this area for quite a long time relative to how long OA has been around for monographs. We've experimented with various models in that time. We actually started with a freemium model. So we sold the print and we made the digital editions freely available. And in 2008, that was possible. But as digital has become more and more important, we can't give away the digital editions anymore. In 2014 or so, we switched to a fee model, so charging a book processing charge for those who wanted to make their works available open access. And then last year, we introduced a collective funding model, so asking libraries collectively to fund at a much lower rate than the BPC for an individual library, but libraries to collectively come together to fund books at no cost to the authors. Our OA fees are standard, $10,000 for a standard length monograph, but the charge might vary for longer or shorter books or books of different levels of complexity. And then for the collective funding model, we're effectively seeking to raise the same amount as that per book. we're focusing on subjects with a social justice or global challenge element, African studies and international development, gender studies and sexuality, environment and climate change. And we're prioritizing authors that we think are least likely to be able to afford open access fees. So authors from the low-income countries, early career researchers, and unaffiliated researchers. They're not the only authors who can benefit from this. We recognize that actually, if you look across the swathe of the arts, humanities, and social sciences, there are a lot of authors who can't publish fees, but this is our starting gambit. At the moment, the majority of our open access titles are still published via the fee model. So this year of that 100, 90 of those will be via a fee model, and then 10 are via the collective funding model. But that is a new model. We introduced it last year, and we're now looking to try to expand it. And maybe we'll get into some of the challenges of those sorts of models as we go through. But that's probably enough from me as a starting point.
Hi, I'm Tara Cyphers. I'm at The Ohio State University Press. I think I will have a much different, we have a much different approach. In the world of university presses, we are one of the smaller university presses. In contrast to Bloomsbury, we're publishing something like 50 monographs a year. 45 to 50. It's across a range of different humanities subjects. So everything from different areas within literary and cultural studies, such as, Victorian studies or comics or narrative, to gender and sexuality studies, critical race and ethnic studies, rhetoric and communication. But mostly we stay within the humanities. In addition to our books program, we also do publish some journals, around 7 academic journals that kind of track with our books program. And we have about 13 staff that support this work across books and journals. In terms of open access and how our press uses open access, what we do, as a smaller press, we just don't have the infrastructure, right, to do some of that direct open access publishing. So, we partner with other companies, with vendors, with different platforms and programs. So some examples are Knowledge Unlatched or the JSTOR Path to Open pilot that's happening right now. We participated in Tome toward an open monograph ecosystem, that pilot that ended in 2022, I believe. We also pursue NEH funding. They have the Fellowships Open Book Program now. And then sometimes we do try to work directly with an author's institution, have a conversation with the author first and kind of go from there. And that's kind of similar maybe to like a book processing charge in some ways. We are looking for some minimum amount of funding. And sometimes we will negotiate down to like a lower amount and have more of a green open access type of approach where maybe there's an embargo on the OA version, just so that we can bring in some revenue from the editions that we are selling. I think you asked about our role with open access, and at my press, because we are smaller, I wear a couple different hats at our press. As assistant director, I'm involved in some of the decisions around what programs we're going to participate in or what are the funding amounts that we want to see. As an acquisitions editor, I do some of the author communications around open access, making sure to get them on board with putting their book into a program. And then with my work in editorial design and production, I'm also thinking through some of the workflows that we need to put into place to accommodate different programs and their requirements.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lev Rickards. I'm the Assistant Dean for Collections and Scholarly Communication at Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit Catholic institution in Silicon Valley. We've been a member of Lever Press for the last 7 years or so, and Lever itself is about 14 years old. Santa Clara is not large enough as a school to run its own university press, but we're fortunate as a library to have some open access funding that we can use to support programs like Lever. And there's a lot that we could do with that money, right? We could use it to pay for APCs. We could use it to support the OA projects of other schools. But Lever was this unique opportunity that aligned with our university's values, a commitment to the liberal arts, a commitment to the teacher-scholar model, and a commitment to values of justice, access, and affordability. And all of this together made the answer to the question, should we become a member of Lever Press, a clear and resounding yes. So for the last year or so, I've served on the Lever Press Oversight Committee, and it's been such a learning process for me coming from like a university library world, getting a front seat to this very specific kind of library-governed scholarly press. As someone who works in collections, someone who's very much a back of house kind of a person, we're often thinking about scholarly communication transactionally. What's the cost of access? What are the licensing terms? However, building a better world really requires broadening the universe of people who get to participate in the generation and application of knowledge. And Lever is a wonderful contribution toward that goal. So a little bit about the press. Lever is a scholarly press supported by 48 institutions that are committed to the liberal arts project. We publish peer-reviewed, digital-first, open access monographs at no cost to authors. And we partner with the University of Michigan Press to make these works available using their Fulcrum platform. Our entire catalog is available to read right now at leverpress.org. Lever is library funded and library governed. We don't receive any money from grants or really any non-library sources. Lever strives to be a better kind of open, with books that are free to read for all, a press that balances membership pledges with expenditures, that maintains a publishing output of 8 to 12 books per year, and that respects the labor of authors, editors, and all those involved. We operate on a membership model, which means that our annual budget is identical with the pledges we accept from member libraries. We have no other source of funding. Everything gets paid out of that pool of money each year. We have a 3-year pledge cycle, which so far has helped us to balance flexibility for our member libraries with a degree of certainty for our authors and editors. If we make a commitment to an author this year, we can be reasonably certain that we'll have the funds to see that commitment through. Personally, I'm really excited to see all of these efforts in the area of library-led publishing. Bringing publishing activity closer to the academy means that people generating the knowledge are intimately involved with its dissemination, and our institutions get to have a say in how that common pool of knowledge is shared.
Okay. So thank you all for that introduction to your work. So we're going to dive into some questions for the panel. And I apologize, when we downloaded the slides, they all became question 1. There's actually 4 questions. So the first question for the panel is, how has your press worked to ensure a stable financial model for open access book publishing? And specifically, what challenges have you faced in doing that? And what lessons have you learned? Roz, would you like to start on that?
Sure. So I think we have a fundamental principle that we need to make as much from an open access book as from a non-open access book. The margins in book publishing are quite slim. This is not the same as the journal's publishing environment. And so if our publishing is to be sustainable, then we need to make sure that we can make enough from that we can make our margin, that we can pay our staff. In terms of the lessons learned, I think I talked about the fact that we'd tried a variety of different models and indeed are running 2 simultaneously at the moment, so the fee model and the collective funding model. So I do think there's really a need to adapt, but also to provide different routes for different authors who might have different sort of circumstances. In terms of a major challenge, I think we have to look at the shift from print to digital that has been ongoing over the last decade and a half for academic books. I think most open access books in practice are subsidized by print sales. Open access books for us do continue to sell in print, not quite as much as a non-OA book, but we might lose perhaps 15 to 20% of our standard sales for open access. But the remainder is still enough to subsidize the publication of that book. Without that, the fees or the amount that we would need to raise to make those books open access would need to be higher. But then if we look at the trends we're seeing, and this was very much accelerated by the pandemic, before the pandemic, I would say if you looked at a typical monograph, we would get about 25% of sales would be for digital editions and 75% would be for print. Now it's 50-50. The rate of change has slowed a bit, but we're still seeing an ongoing transition to digital. So that means that open access needs to bear more of the weight in order to remain sustainable. And alongside that, I'd put inflationary pressures, which I think we're all really aware of in the last couple of years. Another challenge, and this is perhaps coming more from a European perspective, where we do actually see a lot of funders making specific OA book funds available, so separate from grant funding, ring-fenced funding, but often that's capped, and often those caps don't increase year on year. There's been no allowance for inflation, for example, and it's also very unclear to me how those fee caps have been set. And so that is potentially going to be a future challenge, because if the funding can't increase, then I don't know if open access books can still be sustainable in the way that they are for us at the moment.
Tara, would you like to go next?
Sure. In terms of how, we approach a stable financial model, I mentioned earlier that we work with other publishing partners, right? Programs, platforms. And basically our approach is to participate in as many of those as possible, to really seek out all avenues for open access funding. So I mentioned, we participated in Tome. We do submit books to the Knowledge Unlatched program as well. We are participating in the JSTOR Path to Open model, which is a subscribe to open model, where libraries, participate in this program. They purchase the ebook, and then it's opened up after 3 years to everybody. We pursue the NEH grants, of course, and then, like I said, we work with authors institutions. We also, beyond just seeking out specific open access funding that's been earmarked for that purpose, we just also seek out any other kind of subvention funding that the author can get. That's a big part of our program. We have a dedicated staff person, and part of her time is allocated towards, pursuing subvention funds. And we just see it as a way of, supporting the overall book, even if it's not going to the open access edition specifically, right? It's going to the overall book. So that's what we do. We try to participate as much as possible. In terms of some of the challenges, because we're doing that, it's challenging in terms of trying to accommodate the different requirements of every program that we participate in, or the institution and what they want. We have to make sure that we develop workflows that can accommodate each specific requirement, the CC BY license, the funding statement that needs to be printed. We have to make sure we update our internal system so that the right metadata then flows out. We have to know where we need to upload things, and how we do that, and who we communicate with. And these are really small things, but they do add up to being challenging, because they can be one-off requirements. And as a publisher, we do our job best, I think, when we're a well-oiled machine, where we have a standardized process in place to kind of mitigate human error. So then when we have to, do this kind of manual tracking of different processes, that's definitely one challenge that we run into.
We have such different models, but I think it's really clear that all of us up here are committed to open access book publishing, and that's wonderful. I don't think we could have said that 15 years ago. So at Lever, how have we worked to ensure a stable financial model? It hasn't been easy. You put a group of librarians together and say, start an open access press. It's going to take a little while to figure things out. We're very grateful to the support of the University of Michigan Press and our acquisitions editor, Sean Gines. They're doing fantastic work, and they've really helped us to increasingly operate as a more traditional academic press in terms of editorial and acquisitions workflows. We've also benefited from the lyricist's It Takes a Village framework to open up some of these questions about what it could mean to have a sustainable financial model supported by member libraries. One recent challenge that we've had with our membership cycle, we've been around for enough years now that we've started to see turnover at the level of library leadership. So what happens when the original member rep who was passionate about the Lever Initiative moves on from that member library? How do you maintain strong ties to each member institution and a shared understanding about the purpose of the Lever Initiative over time? What it suggests to us is that member relationships have to be a continual focus of our work. There's a constant need to communicate, to tell our story to our members about what we do and why it matters. And that communication aspect can't just be about attracting new members. It also has to be about tending to our existing members.
Great, thank you. So for our next question, we wanted to delve a little bit more into the question of labor. When we say labor, we mean both authors and editors and peer reviewers, or all those that do work to contribute to book publishing. And how do we ensure, how do we live our values and ensure that the labor necessary for open access book publishing is fairly compensated, while at the same time trying to keep costs down? Tara, would you like to start with this one?
Sure. I think that it's important to recognize, first of all, the labor that is involved in publishing, open access publishing, all publishing. And, it's all the labor that goes into producing a book in the traditional way, and then additional things that you have to do, like I mentioned earlier. To elaborate on that, for acquisitions editors, we're producing peer-reviewed content, right? So there's that management of the peer review process. There's the time spent going to conferences, meeting with authors one-on-one, or having Zoom calls or phone calls. It's the time spent reviewing proposals and manuscripts, which is really intensive work. It's, taking projects before an editorial board. It's lots of author communication and support and feedback. And with open access, it's additional communication that you do around that. For editorial departments, it's handling project management, copy editing, paying for copy editing, proofreading, managing indexing, more author communication and support, of course, and then paying for tangible things like copyright registration and CIP fees and things like that. Production departments, they're also doing more project management, typesetting, composition, designing the book, electronic edition included, cover design, doing that work or paying to have it done, lots of work around digital asset management, and even more that's involved in open access. And then marketing is doing all of their usual work again, with metadata management, with sending things out for book reviews, prize submissions and managing that process and paying fees, generating promotional copy, soliciting blurbs, website updates, all of that. And again, additional steps then for open access. Different studies have estimated the cost of all of this work that's involved in monograph publishing. There was the Ithaca SNR study that was done some years ago now, which estimated the basic cost at $28,000. And it went up from there when you considered even more indirect costs. I think it was around $40,000. Tome more recently, for their project, they estimated that cost around $20,000. And I wanted to just share some of our own costs. I think there's a slide for that we had estimated looking at this is just 5 sample titles. We actually have more information than this. But, we looked across our different departments, acquisitions, manuscript editorial, design and production. And this is the work on just our scholarly books. We do some trade books, but it's just a handful, and we extracted that out. marketing costs and then just other overhead costs. And you can see like the overall average is kind of in line with that tome figure of 20,000. It hangs right around there. Yeah, so I just think it's useful to kind of see, the costs that are involved, the labor that's involved. And this is just what we bear as the publisher, right? And we haven't even talked about author compensation. I will say, I think most authors, they're mostly fine with foregoing royalties on the ebook. In the interest of the wider dissemination of their scholarship. That's a part of the messaging, that we do as publishers to get them on board with that. But I still think it's a factor that we should also keep in mind as well. In terms of keeping costs down for libraries, how do we do that then after we look at all of these costs? I think that it's important to recognize the other revenue streams that we have as publishers. And I want to point again to another study that was done, this one by Ithaca SNR and AU Presses. It was a joint study, and it was looking at the print revenue for open access monographs. And that study aggregated data from 1,000 titles from 26 publishers. And after removing some of the outliers, they found average print revenue of around $8,800. And again, I wanted to also just share some of our own data on this on the next slide. And this is just a sampling of 14 different titles, reaching back to 2019, so that you can see, that's about 5 years ago. So we have about 5 years worth of data there. But then some of the newer titles, they only have about 2 years worth of information there. But you can see that, we took into consideration what are we making off of the hardback, off of the paperback, whether it was released right away or released later on. And, it averages out to around 7,300, which is just under that overall average that the study I came up with, I mentioned earlier. And on the next slide, I just wanted to also just list those citations in case anyone is interested in looking at those sources in more detail.
And what I can do at the end is pull this slide up when we're done. And if anyone wants to come up and take a picture of it at the end, we can leave it up. Okay, so let's go back to our question. And Lev, do you want to answer how do we ensure that labor is fairly compensated?
Yeah, I'm consistently astonished at the quality of work for the people that work with Lever, both our acquisitions editor and the rest of the staff. I don't think Lever would be possible without the kind of organizational support that comes from partnering with a press. At its birth, we were partnered with Amherst University Press, and today with Michigan. And they've been a wonderful partner. So thanks also to Charles Watkinson. I mentioned earlier that our annual budget is identical to the membership fees that we accept from member libraries. We bring in just over $300,000 per year. That's our total annual budget. More than half of that goes to paying staff, and the rest goes to everything that was up there: production, marketing, acquisitions, editorial, and infrastructure. Because when you're digital first, there's a lot related to making these books available on a platform online. All of that is funded entirely by libraries. Just this year, Lever's Oversight Committee decided to commit a portion of the operating budget to pay honoraria to reviewers, authors, and editors, those whose contributions to open access presses have traditionally gone unacknowledged financially. And now that our acquisitions and production side has gotten a little more routine, a little stronger, we've decided that further growth in membership dollars should go towards defraying the cost for each membership library. There was, real conversation among all of the member libraries about, well, should we try to just grow? If we keep growing and get to a point where we can publish more books, maybe the per book cost goes down. Right now, all in with staffing and everything else, if you just divide the number of books we produce by the annual money we take in from member libraries, we look more like the Ithaca study than like the Tome study, right? Closer to 28,000 than 20,000 per book. We'd love to get that down, but after a lot of deliberation and consultation among member libraries, the thought was, let's make the membership costs lower first, and then if we can grow later, we can talk about growing output.
Russ?
I was going to cover a lot of the same points that Tara was. So in the interest of getting through our questions, maybe we could move on, because I think Tara did a great job of
Is there anything you'd like to
elaborating.
specifically add about Bloomsbury, or should we just move on?
I guess a point I want to make, which is that a lot of times when we're thinking about cost, people tend to focus on the copy editing and the typesetting, but I really think it's about the people. It's about the editors and the marketers who are nurturing those books and those authors through to publication. And so when we're talking about labor, we really mean those people. And when we're thinking about kind of how can we kind of keep costs down, we're actually thinking about taking some of that kind of, I don't know, that support for authors out of the system. Like, there's not much you can do to, the pre-press costs are what they are. When I talk about pre-press costs, I mean the copy editing, the typesetting, and so on. And I just want to make sure that we are valuing that work and that close attention that our editors are paying, the involvement they have in their subject areas, the way they are working to nurture communications within those areas.
Thank you. So let's do the third question, and then we'll see if we have any questions from the audience. So this one, how can publishers and librarians work together to make open access funding models more sustainable so that we can achieve the goal that I think we all have of transforming the book publishing landscape in a way that is sustainable from a financial standpoint and other standpoints? So Lev, do you want to start on this one?
Absolutely. Thank you. So, I said I've learned a lot by being a part of Lever just these last few years. Publishing is a specialized profession, and the people who work in that field should be fairly compensated for their labor. I've learned so much just watching our acquisitions editor and the kinds of relationships that he nurtures. It's remarkable. Having said that, I do believe that it is a good thing for scholarly publishing to be closer to the academy. When purely for-profit publishing dominates the landscape, it seems inevitable that the profit motive will come to drive the ways that we share knowledge, which I don't think is in the best interest of the system of scholarly communication. I've only been coming to Charleston for a few years, but my sense is that this conference was built on the idea that publishers and libraries are not in two opposing camps. If we truly want to increase the wide dissemination of scholarly knowledge for the public good, it's going to take all of us. And that requires an openness to reconceptualizing the relationship between libraries and publishers. So being a part of Lever has been a fantastic way for our library to learn more about publishing, about the business and the real costs. By talking together about those costs of disseminating scholarly knowledge, we've built shared understanding between member libraries, all of our member libraries, and our publishing partner, and made it possible for dozens of libraries to participate in a collective action project that demonstrates the viability of library-led, library-governed, open access book publishing.
Russ?
Yeah, so our question was, how can we work together to make the funding models more sustainable? And I think the word sustainable often does a lot of work. What's sustainable for one of us might not be sustainable for another. If we have an OA fee model and it's set at a rate that kind of is sustainable for a publisher, that's great. But if you're a research-intensive university and you've got a lot of authors who are publishing books, that's not sustainable for you. You're suddenly shouldering a lot of the extra costs associated with open access. So I think moving towards these collective funding models needs to be the direction that we go in. This is something which enables all of those in the ecosystem to contribute, to be part of how we develop open access publishing. It creates a partnership between libraries and publishers, and that might be set up in different ways. So, it might be embedded within the library, but it might also be something which a publisher is inviting libraries to come and partner with them. And so with Bloomsbury Open Collections, our initiative, we want to hear from the library community. It's in its second year. It is something that we will develop over time. We want to hear from you what is working, what isn't, and to create, Charlotte was talking about community and collaboration, and that needs to be something where everyone has a voice. This isn't something where we're imposing this model, but we're saying, how can we work together? Because I think the only way that we're really going to transform open access book publishing is if we move from a place where you're buying books to a place where you're supporting models that enable open access. And that eventually, maybe that's about switching acquisitions budget from purchase to open access models. How does that work? And I will say at the moment for us, this feels quite a precarious initiative. It's quite hard to get support. We feel that a lot of the support for our initiative, and I don't think I'm alone in saying this, is coming from dedicated open access budgets, perhaps from bits of year-end budget that, we've got, a few $1,000s, we might be able to put that towards a few of these OA book initiatives. From a publishing perspective, that makes it incredibly hard to make it sustainable. It means that often we don't know until quite late in the year whether we've raised enough funds to make a book OA or not. That creates a lot of uncertainty for authors. We worry about what might happen, if we can't sell that book because it might be going open access, so we can't release it on a sales model. But then if it doesn't go OA, then it potentially damages the book. So we need to find some way to get these collective models on a more sustainable footing. I do think that's the future, but I also think we're not there yet.
I just would second everything that's already been said. It's about libraries and publishers working together on this issue. It's about collaboration, conversation, community, all the C words. I think, there is a lot that we know. We know a lot more about open access publishing now than we did 10 years ago, but we still have to answer that sustainability question. So I'm not sure how to completely answer that, but those are some of the values and approaches that we need to have. And I did just want to mention this initiative, University-Based Publishing Futures, which is meant to bring librarians and universities and publishers together. And it's a great coalition, I think, to get involved with, where we can promote that cross conversation and collaboration.
Great. Great. Thank you all so much. We are going to skip our last question, and we just have a few minutes for audience questions. And if anyone does have a question, please use the mic, even though it's a small room, because we are recording. Does anyone have a question? Yeah. We have a runner with the mic to help that.